Hi, I'm Gabogrecan and I'm your artist today, painting Fit for a Queen, which is one of my premier collections. You're going to watch some time of me actually painting, but I will cut it quite frequently so that you hopefully don't get bored with watching any particular thing. What I'm doing now is placing water on the silk. The water actually slows down the movement of the dye and gives me a little more time to add a second colour and to merge them. A lot of people don't do this, but I find it very successful in the way I paint. But it does make the silk fairly heavy with both water and dye. So you've got to be careful that the dye doesn't flow into the water and not hold its shape. You've just got to have just the right amount of water there. So what I'm doing now is I'm just going around the edge of this flower with a pink, and because there's no such thing as white in silk dyes, if you want a lighter colour you have to rub it down with water, and that's what I do when I'm using this pink colour. It's quite a bright pink, but when I rub it down with water I can get quite a lovely soft shade, which you can just see a little bit at the bottom of the screen there. Now there's a time that you've got when you can do this, when it won't work anymore. It's dried too much and you can't get some of it to merge into the background like I'm doing here. So you've got to work fairly quickly, and you have to make sure that you keep your brush moving into the edge so that it just keeps coming out into the water and making a pale pink when it dries. I'm now adding a darker colour. I find if you do this it adds more depth to the petal and it makes it more interesting to look at. So I'm putting a deeper purple colour around the edges and in some of the little bits and pieces that are on this piece of petal. I will also rub that in with some water too, just to make sure that it softens on the edges and doesn't leave a hard edge. Now I don't know if some of the viewers have their little dogs at their feet when they work, but I do. So if you hear some little doggy noises, don't get too concerned. It's just the noise of one or more of my 5 Cavalier King Charles Spaniels. I love them dearly and they enjoy being with me when I'm painting. You will notice that my work is very fine, delicate perhaps you'd call it, and I find that sometimes I wonder if I can actually get the small brush into the spaces that I want it to go. It surprises me sometimes that I'm able to do this. So don't be afraid if you want to do some painting and add little tiny bits to your painting, and you think that there's no way you're going to be able to do it. You just might be able to, so give it a go. I don't know what you know about silk painting, But basically the method is you draw the design on first with gutta, which is a liquid rubber, but you can get a water-based one as well. Now I've got gold gutta as part of the design, and that is a water-based one. The other one is the solvent gutta. Now once you draw the design on, you have to let that dry, and I use a dryer to dry it more quickly, and then you start your painting. Now I personally don't work out my colours and where everything's going to go first. Because I have a real love and perhaps an understanding of colour, when I place a colour down, I sort of know what's going to work next to it. So I sort of continue on in that way, trusting the skill I've got there. Once you finish your painting, and you'll see this one finished at the end of the video, you then steam it, and once it comes out of the steamer and you let it dry for some time, making sure it's totally dry, you then wash, and wash it really well so that you get any surplus dye out. But in my case I use salt in my painting, so I've got to make sure I get all salt out of the silk as well. Once you've done that, you're sort of nearly home and hosed. The last thing I do then is iron it, and when you iron it, you do get sometimes a little bit of the gutta catching on the cloth that you put over it. I use a fine lawn, and you've got to iron it 3 or 4 times to get the stickiness of the gutta off the painting. It can be quite tedious doing this, but it's really essential, because if you don't, when you fold your silk scarf in this case, it can actually stick to itself while it's in your drawer. It's much better anyway to have your scarves hanging on a hanger in your wardrobe, so they're hanging flat, rather than having them folded in a drawer. Much safer indeed. Working on the background now. And as you saw then, I watered it first, and I water every single bit unless I'm doing a flat colour. So you will see some flat colours shortly on this, but generally speaking I merge my colours. So I need the water to enable me to do that. By just rubbing the colour back with water, I am actually creating another colour, if you like, which you would normally, in normal painting, add white to, so you would have a dark blue and a light blue. Normally in my scarf designs, I do not have them so busy, and I always paint the background first and then paint the foreground. But in this design, the background and foreground merge, so I paint either as I move along the scarf. I have often left a space between the gold gutta and the actual motif, in this case the orchid, and so in that space between them I'm adding another colour, which is actually orange. It's a bit hard to tell what the colours are when they're this wet, but orange gives a good strong thump to the pink, and it looks quite spectacular. Now sometimes some of the spaces that are left open, in other words, they're not entirely enclosed with the gutta, I choose colours that will merge together when it bleeds through that open space. Like for instance, if I'm doing blue and orange is going to bleed into it, it'll make a nasty sort of brownish colour. So I add yellow, and yellow will allow the blue to turn into a nice green at one end, and it'll allow the orange to turn into a paler orange with the blue in it at the other end of the bleed. I personally think that what makes a good painting in general is the artist's knowledge of colour. Unfortunately, many beginner painters paint in the colours that they love and are interested in without having any real knowledge of what happens when these colours merge or sit side by side. They should really have a little bit of study, if you like, and learn some of these skills of colour. There comes the yellow, because that little bit of space between the gold and the black gutta is going to be orange, and the end of that space is not enclosed with the gutta, so when I add the orange to it, it will bleed out. And in the smaller piece that's just been done, that little edgy bit, you can see that there's already a bleeding out of the orange. Sometimes I have to use the brush in a little bit of water and just rub it a bit to make sure it evenly bleeds out. This scarf has a rolled edge on it, and I have to make sure I paint a bit heavier at that point, and that's why I turn it over to make sure I've done the back of it. You can see some little bits of white showing there. I'm going to make sure they're all covered up. You might have noticed that I added some salt to the background there because I want a bit of texture there. Salt draws the colour to it and leaves a pattern of light and dark spaces around the circular pieces of salt. And now I'm adding that orange in the little space. Except I don't have to add orange, I might have added green. And in fact, that little bit you just saw was green. You can see some of the pink on the petals above to your right, which are now drying. You can see how they're fading back, whereas the one I'm working on right now is not. It looks quite dark. One of the difficulties you may have had in seeing down this strip of painting is because when the silk is spread at either end and it's such a long piece, it creates waves up and down which have lower sections and higher sections. So when I go into a lower section to paint, the camera has difficulty picking up everything as it would on the higher level. This is another pink one, but of course it's on a narrow strip this time, so I'm not going to get it as light as the petals, because it will move across the narrow strip before I can get back to it, and therefore it won't, when I add the water, it won't be as light. I'm adding the dark edge, and because it's fairly saturated with both the pink dye and water, the dark edge isn't moving across as quickly as the pink edge did. You can notice there that I've moved up the silk nearly to the end of it. That's because the shape I start working on moves up, so I've got to follow it. And therefore now, instead of working across the screen and filling it in smaller pieces, I have to work in long pieces and get them complete before I can go on to the next shape. You may ask if I'm doing orange between the gold friddles and the actual black gutta. Why do I sometimes change it to green? Well, it's just to give a bit of variety, and looking around the silk work that's been done, you know, what's it looking like, and will green fit in there comfortably? But on the whole, I am doing orange, as I said earlier, just to give that bit of thump to the whole painting using the more traditional colours. Here you can see that I've worked, even though I've had to work up the long pieces, I've worked along from the right to left as well. So the right side has more completed than has the left. Now you may also query, am I still using pink? Well, yes, pink was the overall colour that controlled the painting. So there's pink all the way up it, so that your eye can follow the shapes all the way from top to bottom, bottom to top. However, if you just look over there at the edge, you'll see that I've got a blue short stripe, and I'm now going to add some other colours to the strips other than pink. And there you go, that's about all you can see of the actual painting, but I'll show you some stills. There's one where it's nearly finished on the screen. There's a close-up of that background edge at the top end that I was doing, and there it is after it's come out of the steamer. Hope you enjoyed. Bye.